The morning rush at Denver Central blurred into echoes, footsteps, voices, the hum of trains. But when Officer Noah Briggs' K-9 partner Ace froze mid-step, the world seemed to fall silent. Through the haze of commuters, a woman in a red coat pulled along a little girl who never smiled. Her hand tapped 5 times against her leg. Pause, then 5 again. A pattern only a desperate soul would send. That small rhythm changed everything, because sometimes it isn't the scream that saves a life. It's the quiet instinct to listen. And that morning, one officer and his dog did just that. Subscribe if you believe some heroes don't wear capes. They walk on 4 paws and hear what the heart cannot. The first light crept through a thin veil of mist over Denver Central Station. The air smelled of wet concrete and distant rain, the kind that made every sound softer, every breath slower. Officer Noah Briggs stood beneath the steel awning, tall and lean in his Navy police jacket, zipped to the collar, the word K-9 unit glinting faintly on his chest. 8 years on this post had taught him how silence could say more than chaos. Beside him, Ace, the German shepherd with brown and black fur, stood alert, nostrils flaring. The dog's calm was its own kind of discipline, a mirror of the man who trained him. Noah's eyes moved over the crowd, tracing lives he'd never know. He once believed that if he paid attention enough, he might prevent the next tragedy. But some wounds never made noise when they opened. The morning trains roared, people hurried, and the rhythm of duty returned. A woman's laugh rose above the crowd, then faded. Noah adjusted his grip on the leash, feeling the slight pull of Ace's focus shift. The dog's body stiffened. Noah followed the gaze toward a woman in a red coat holding a small girl's hand. The child's steps were hesitant, her frame thin under a faded pink shirt. For a second, her head turned. No smile, just the quiet plea of someone who didn't belong in that morning rush. Noah's breath caught, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was instinct, maybe memory. Years ago, another girl about the same age had looked back at him through the smoke of a burning house, the daughter he couldn't save. Since then, every frightened face seemed to echo hers. "Easy," he murmured to Ace, but the dog's tail stayed rigid. Its muscles trembled like a string pulled too tight. The veteran in Noah stirred. Old training, old grief, a whisper saying, "Don't ignore this." The woman tugged the child's arm sharply, moving faster through the terminal. The girl stumbled but didn't cry. Noah felt the first drop of rain hit his hand. Cold, deliberate. The station lights flickered against the fogged windows. In that faint reflection, he saw himself. A man still standing where he'd lost too much, holding on to purpose because it was all that remained. He reached down, resting his palm gently on Ace's neck. "Let's keep an eye on them," he said quietly. Ace gave a low, almost human sigh, then started forward, nose close to the ground. The storm outside began to gather strength, the sky turning a muted silver. Inside, the station felt smaller, air tighter. Noah's heart beat steady, but something deep in him knew. This was not just another patrol. It was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. And for the first time in years, he felt the faint return of fear. Not for himself, but for someone else. The rain had grown steadier, whispering against the station roof like a quiet metronome. The crowd moved as one great current of motion and sound, but Noah heard something else, a rhythm only silence could hold. Ace had stopped again. The German shepherd's body was taut, muscles flexed beneath his coat, eyes fixed ahead. Noah followed the line of his gaze and saw the girl. She was standing beside the woman in the red coat, her small hand resting against her mother's sleeve. Then came the movement, 5 light taps of her fingers. A pause. 5 again. It was too deliberate to be random. Noah felt the hair on his arms rise. Patterns meant messages, and this one spoke of fear. He stepped closer, rain clinging to his jacket, voice steady but calm. "Ma'am," he said, "Police K9 unit. May I see your ID?" The woman turned, her features carefully arranged. About 40, well-dressed, the kind of compose that came from habit, not peace. "Of course, officer," she replied softly. "I'm just taking my daughter to visit her grandmother." Her voice was sweet, practiced, but her eyes, they didn't match the story. Behind them was something caged. Ace let out a low rumble. The sound cut through the hum of the terminal. The girl's gaze lifted to Noah's, trembling but steady enough to speak without words. Rainlight glistened in her eyes as her small fingers repeated the same code, 5 soft taps against the fabric of her sleeve. Noah's pulse slowed. He'd seen signals like this before, victims too afraid to speak. In his chest, something shifted, that quiet old ache that never fully healed. The woman noticed his attention. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone tight. Noah looked at her, then at the child. "Not yet," he said gently, "but I'd like you both to stay here for a moment." His hand moved slightly, signaling backup through his radio. The girl flinched at the sound, instinctively stepping behind the dog, as if she knew he was the safer one. Ace stayed still, eyes locked, calm but ready, a living wall between fear and freedom. For a long moment, time seemed to hold its breath. The hum of trains, the drizzle outside, even the murmur of strangers, all faded into that fragile space where truth begins to surface. The woman's hand tightened around the child's wrist, just enough to make her wince. Noah saw it, and so did Ace. The dog's low growl deepened, protective but restrained. Noah's voice softened to a near whisper. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." The girl blinked, her lips moving silently. "Help me." Noah felt the words more than he saw them, the kind of plea that reached through years, through the loss of another small voice he could never save. He took a slow breath, his eyes meeting Ace's, that wordless understanding between man and dog that comes from walking the same edge for too long. "All right, partner," he murmured. "We listen." Outside, thunder rolled far away. Inside, beneath the rainlight and the hush of strangers, something fragile had begun to crack. A lie, a secret, a story not yet told. But Noah knew one thing for sure. When a child finds the courage to send a signal, it's a call no man of conscience can ignore. The storm had settled into a steady rain, its rhythm like a heartbeat over the station's glass roof. The air was thick with echoes, footsteps, murmurs, the rustle of wet coats. Somewhere inside all that noise, Noah heard what no one else did. Fear. He pressed the radio to his shoulder, voice calm but urgent. Possible abduction. Need eyes near the east exit. The reply came back soft, indifferent. Copy that, but everything looks fine from here. Noah's jaw tightened. He'd heard that tone before, the kind that came from those who'd never learned to trust instinct over paperwork. Beside him, Ace tugged hard on the leash, body rigid, a low growl deep in his chest. The dog's entire frame seemed to pulse with awareness, like a wire drawn tight. Noah exhaled slowly. "I know, buddy," he murmured. "I feel it too." Ahead, the woman leaned down, whispering something to the girl before gripping her wrist and moving faster through the crowd. The girl stumbled to keep up, her pale shirt clinging to her in the damp air. Noah took a step forward. "Ma'am, stop right there." His voice echoed through the terminal, steady but sharp enough to turn heads. She spun around, eyes flashing with fear and defiance. "I have every right to leave, officer." For a brief second, everything held still. The rain, the crowd, the hum of the loudspeakers. Then Ace barked, a thunderous, commanding sound that shattered the illusion of calm. The girl flinched but didn't retreat. Her voice, small and trembling, broke through the air like a single clear note. "Please, help us." The sound hit Noah harder than any siren could. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People stepped back, parting like a tide around him. The world seemed to narrow to just the three of them, the officer, the woman, the child. He saw the tremor in the girl's fingers, the pulse beating in her neck. Her courage was quiet, but it was enough. Noah reached for the cuffs on his belt, stepping forward slowly, deliberately. "Ma'am," he said, his tone softer now, but weighted with command. "Let go of her hand." The woman froze. Rain dripped from her coat. For a heartbeat, her mask cracked. Panic, guilt, exhaustion. Behind her, Ace stood poised, fur bristled, eyes fixed on the child, not the threat. Noah understood then. This wasn't a chase. It was a rescue. He took another step. The girl looked at him, and for a moment he saw not fear, but trust. Fragile, trembling, but real. The kind of trust a man like him hadn't felt in years. "Easy," he whispered, voice low as the rain outside. "You're safe now." And as Ace inched forward, muscles coiled, ready to protect rather than pursue, Noah felt that familiar ache turn into something else. A quiet certainty, the kind that only comes when instinct and mercy meet in the same breath. The rain had turned heavier, drumming softly against the glass roof like distant applause. The crowd, once murmuring, now stood silent. All that remained was the sound of breath, shallow, tense, waiting. The woman stumbled as Ace barked sharply. Her bag slipped from her grasp and fell, landing with a dull, heavy thud on the wet floor. Papers spilled out like broken feathers, passports, photographs, a small black phone without a SIM card. Noah crouched slowly, his knees creaking under the weight of years. He reached into the mess and lifted one of the photographs. It was a child's face, not the girl's, but another, then another, each one different. Each one missing something behind the eyes. He felt his stomach tighten, the air grow colder. "God," he whispered, more prayer than word. The woman's voice trembled. "I didn't want this. They made me. You have to believe me." She looked smaller now, her red coat soaked, her mascara streaked like ash. There was fear in her voice, but not the right kind. It wasn't guilt. It was the terror of someone caught between survival and shame. Noah met her eyes and saw the truth. A life spent obeying orders from people who never showed their faces. "They said if I didn't," she began, but her voice broke. Ace stayed between her and the child, muscles taut, tail still. His ears flicked with every sound, but his eyes softened when they met the girl's. Grace clung to his fur, trembling, but no longer hiding her face. For the first time, Noah saw something fragile blooming there. Trust, the kind built in a single heartbeat when the world finally gives you a reason to hope. He straightened slowly, the photos still in his hand. Around him, the crowd began to murmur again, words like police, kidnapping, evidence floating in the air. Noah ignored them. He only saw the girl, and the faint reflection of his daughter in her frightened eyes. Maybe this was why he was still here. Maybe the years of patrols, the silence of empty nights, had been leading to this moment. He nodded to Ace. "Guard her," he said softly, then turned back to the woman. "Ma'am, you're under arrest." The cuffs clicked quietly, a sound final but not cruel. Her shoulders sagged, as though the truth itself had finally grown too heavy to carry. Ace didn't move until Noah placed a hand on his neck. The dog's stance eased, his gaze still fixed protectively on Grace. The world outside was chaos, sirens, rain, voices, but in that small circle of light, something felt still. Noah gathered the photographs and tucked them carefully into an evidence bag. As he sealed it, a single tear from the child fell onto the plastic, a quiet symbol of all that had been lost, and maybe all that could still be found. He looked down at Ace, his voice almost a whisper. "You did good, partner." And for a moment, despite the cold and the noise and the grief still unspoken, Noah Briggs believed, just for a breath, that the world could still be saved, one child at a time. Night fell heavy over the city, the kind that swallowed streetlights whole. Rain came in sheets, tapping against the cruiser windows like restless fingers. Inside the precinct, the glow of computer monitors reflected on tired faces. Captain Howard Banks stood by the evidence board, his posture straight despite the hour. The phone recovered from the woman's bag was now on his desk, screen cracked, faint signal flickering. One message, one set of coordinates. "This isn't random," he murmured, voice deep and steady. "We're looking at a network." Noah stood across from him, soaked jacket still clinging to his frame. Ace sat quietly by his feet, tail still, eyes alert. The drive to the outskirts was silent except for the storm. Wipers moved like a slow heartbeat. Headlights cut through fog that rolled low over the road. Noah's thoughts drifted between duty and memory. The girl's trembling hand, the photographs, the sound of a child's voice saying, "Please help us." He looked in the rearview mirror. Ace's reflection stared back, calm but tense. The dog knew. Instinct always did. "We'll bring them home," Noah said softly. It wasn't an order. It was a promise whispered into the dark. They reached the old industrial yard just past midnight. The rain had turned cold, biting. The warehouse loomed ahead, a husk of rust and shadow. Ace jumped down first, his paws splashing in shallow puddles. Noah followed, flashlight in hand. "Stay sharp," he said, though the words were more habit than warning. Captain Banks's voice crackled through the radio. "Team 2 on the north side, move in on my mark." The air was thick with the smell of metal and damp earth. Then, a sound. A soft, broken sob behind the steel door. Ace froze, body rigid, ears pricked. A growl rumbled low in his chest. Noah met his eyes, then nodded. "Go on, boy." The dog pressed forward, nose to the rusted handle, pawing once before stepping back. Noah gripped the lock, gave it a twist. It didn't budge. One hard kick. The door flew open. His flashlight sliced through the dark. The beam caught faces, small, pale, frightened. 5 children huddled together on the concrete floor, eyes wide and hollow. The smallest whispered, "Are you the police?" Noah lowered his light, voice trembling. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You're safe now." For a moment, the rain faded into nothing. The world was still, just the smell of cold air, the sound of quiet breathing, the faint movement of Ace's tail brushing the ground. Noah crouched down, removing his jacket and wrapping it around the nearest child. Their tiny hands clung to the fabric like it was the last solid thing left in the world. He didn't speak again. There was nothing left to say. Some rescues didn't need words, only presence. The storm had grown wild. Sheets of rain blurred the red and blue lights, turning the night into a trembling watercolor of chaos and steel. Noah wiped his sleeve across his brow, breath rising like smoke in the cold air. The children were safe. That should have been the end. But somewhere in the dark, an engine roared to life. "Black SUV heading east," a voice shouted through the radio. Noah didn't wait for orders. "Ace, go!" he barked. The dog leapt forward like a streak of muscle and instinct, paws striking the pavement in a rhythm older than fear. Noah sprinted after him, boots splashing through puddles that glimmered under the flicker of sirens. The rain stung his face, the kind that carried weight, like the sky itself wanted to wash away the sins of the night. Ahead, the SUV fish-tailed, tires skimming across the slick asphalt. Its taillights cut through the downpour, a pair of red ghosts fading into mist. Noah's chest burned, every breath raw. He could hear the dogs growl through the storm, steady and fierce. "Hold him, Ace," he shouted, voice nearly lost to the wind. For a heartbeat, time slowed, the blur of headlights, the smell of oil and rain, the thud of his heart matching the wail of the siren. Then, a flash. Ace lunged. His jaws caught the driver's arm through the open window, the sound sharp and desperate. The vehicle veered, spinning in slow motion before slamming into the chain-link fence with a burst of sparks. The metal screamed, the world went white, and then silence. The kind that follows something irreversible. Noah reached the wreck, soaked to the bone, lungs burning. The suspect, a man in his 30s with a shaved head and hollow eyes, tried to raise his gun. "Don't," Noah said, voice calm but final. Ace stood between them, fur drenched, teeth bared, growl deep and unwavering. The man hesitated, just long enough for Noah to disarm him, and snapped the cuffs closed. As the rain fell harder, washing blood from the man's hands and mud from Noah's boots, he looked at Ace. The dog's chest rose and fell with steady rhythm, eyes still fierce but tired. "Good boy," Noah whispered. Ace tilted his head slightly, rain dripping from his muzzle, and for a moment, in the blur of police lights and thunder, everything felt still. There was no triumph, no applause, just two silhouettes, a man and his dog, standing in the storm, their breath mingling with the rain, carrying the quiet knowledge that doing the right thing often leaves you standing alone in the cold. By midnight, the rain had stopped. The city outside the precinct was washed clean, its streets glistening under the pale orange glow of the street lamps. Inside, the air was quiet, heavy with exhaustion and the faint scent of coffee and wet fabric. Noah sat on a bench in the hallway, his jacket still damp, the weight of the night pressing down on his shoulders. Ace lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert, the way soldiers rest after battle, never fully asleep. Across the room, Grace sat wrapped in a gray blanket far too big for her. The fluorescent lights gave her face a soft, almost unreal glow. In her arms, she clutched a torn teddy bear, one ear missing, stuffing showing at the seams. When Ace lifted his head, she looked up and smiled faintly. "He heard me," she whispered. "He heard my signal." Noah felt something stir deep inside, something that had lain buried beneath years of discipline and silence. He knelt beside her, his voice low. "Ace listens to things we forget to hear," he said. "The quiet kind of cries, the ones that come from the heart." Grace nodded, eyes shining not with tears, but with the fragile light of relief. Captain Howard Banks entered the room, coat draped over one arm, lines of fatigue carving deeper into his face. He looked at Noah for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't just solve a case," he said softly. "You pulled a child back from hell." Noah didn't reply. He only nodded, eyes fixed on Grace as she leaned against the wall, finally breathing freely. There was nothing heroic about what had happened. No headlines, no ceremony, just the small, quiet victory of seeing a frightened child sleep again. Ace shifted closer, his nose brushing Noah's knee, as if reminding him that silence, too, could be sacred. Outside, the first rays of dawn crept through the blinds. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that mirrored the light. Noah rose slowly and walked to the window. He could see the reflection of himself and Ace in the glass, two survivors in a world still learning to heal. He thought of his wife and daughter, of the way grief had once turned his heart to stone, and how tonight, through one child's trembling voice, something in him had finally cracked open. He turned back, watching Grace sleep. "Let's go home, partner," he murmured. Ace stood, stretching, his fur catching the faint light of morning. The world outside was still cold, still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Noah felt a quiet warmth return, not blazing like fire, but steady as breath. The morning came soft and golden, like the world was holding its breath after a long storm. Sunlight streamed through the precinct windows, falling across the floor where puddles from the night still glimmered. The air smelled faintly of coffee and wet concrete. For the first time in days, Noah felt something close to peace, not loud or triumphant, but quiet, like the sigh that follows pain. Ace sat beside him, calm and steady, eyes following every movement in the room. A car door shut outside. Moments later, a man and woman entered, their faces pale from sleepless nights and endless worry. Grace froze at the sight of them. Then she ran. The sound of her footsteps echoed, quick, fragile, alive. When she reached them, the three of them collapsed into an embrace that seemed to stop time itself. Tears, laughter, trembling hands, the language of reunion that words could never touch. The officers nearby turned away, some pretending to check their notes, others simply blinking too often. Captain Banks stood at a distance, his jaw tight, his eyes soft. Grace pulled back at last, cheeks damp, eyes bright. She looked around the room, then ran toward Ace. "Thank you, hero," she said in a whisper that carried farther than any shout. The dog didn't move at first, just tilted his head, as if he understood. Then, slowly, his tail began to wag, brushing against Noah's boot. Grace hugged his neck, pressing her face into his fur. Ace leaned into her touch, eyes half closed in the morning light. It was a moment too pure for applause, too simple for ceremony. Noah crouched beside them. His hand rested on Ace's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of life beneath the fur. "You saved her," he murmured, voice barely audible. "And you saved me too." He looked toward the window, where sunlight danced across the glass, the same glass that had reflected sirens the night before. The world outside was still the same, flawed, unpredictable, scarred. But within him, something small and essential had begun to mend. As he stood, the hum of the precinct slowly returned, phones ringing, papers rustling, voices rising again. Yet through it all, Noah felt a stillness that nothing could disturb. He watched Grace leave hand in hand with her parents, sunlight wrapping them in warmth. Ace sat beside him, watching too, tail still. "Come on, partner," Noah said softly. "Let's get some rest." The camera would linger there, on the officer and his dog, framed by the light of a new day, then fade to black as words appeared. Sometimes the loudest cries for help are silent, and sometimes heroes walk on four paws. Sometimes the loudest cry for help never reaches our ears. It hides in a trembling hand, a quiet look, or a small signal only a patient heart can hear. Remember this: compassion is not measured by how loud we speak, but by how willing we are to listen. Officer Noah and Ace didn't save Grace because they were the strongest. They saved her because they stopped and noticed. And maybe that's what the world needs more of today: gentleness that pays attention. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to join our family. May kindness guide you, always.